The first thing Lotte Brenner noticed was not the steam. It was the American guard's hand. She had left the door open. Behind Lotte, 29 German women stood packed shoulder to shoulder in a processing corridor that smelled of bleach, wet concrete, and fear. Beyond the doorway, white tile disappeared into a cloud of heat. 12 silver showerheads hung from the ceiling like small metal mouths. Someone whispered, "Bitte, nein, please, no." Lotte could feel the words move through the line before anyone said them plainly. Showers. The Americans were taking them to the showers. A woman behind her began to pray. Another made a choking sound, as if the air had turned solid in her throat. The guard at the door was a Women's Army Corps corporal named Ruth Alden. Her uniform was clean. Her hair was pinned so tightly under her cap that it looked painful. She held a clipboard in one hand and a burlap sack of clean towels in the other. In careful German, she said, "Clothes in the bins, shoes together. You will be deloused, washed, and given clean garments before barracks assignment." Lot heard only one word: washed, because the lie had been drilled into her with the patience of a nail going through wood. The enemy would smile. The enemy would give instructions. The enemy would say it was hygiene. Then the doors would shut, and the water would never come. But in the next 20 minutes, the most dangerous thing to come out of those American showerheads would not be gas. It would be evidence. 2 weeks earlier, Lotte had been wearing a Luftwaffe auxiliary jacket with 2 missing buttons, sitting at a switchboard in a half-buried communications post outside Würzburg. The room had once been a wine cellar. By April of 1945, it had become a nest of wires, maps, cracked headphones, and exhausted girls pretending the war still had a shape. Lotte was 23. She had learned Morse code faster than most of the boys in her school. That talent had become service. Service had become obedience. Obedience had become something she no longer knew how to name. That morning, she was trying to route a message from a retreating anti-aircraft battery when the first American shell landed close enough to shake dust out of the ceiling. A second blast killed the lights. Then came shouting from above, "Hands up, women out first." At first, no one moved. Frau Dietrich, the senior clerk, slapped the table and hissed that surrender was disgrace. But the cellar door had splintered inward, and the war that had ruled Lotte's childhood was suddenly standing at the top of the stairs, wearing an American helmet. Lot raised both hands. So did the others. 34 women came out into the spring rain. Switchboard operators, cipher typists, file clerks, radio assistants, the thin female machinery that kept a collapsing military talking to itself for 1 more hour. The American soldiers separated them from the men almost immediately. Frauen here, Männer dort. Women here, men there. The order should have relieved them. Instead, it frightened them more, because for years, they had been told that captured German women faced a special kind of punishment. Not the kind printed in regulations, not the kind Red Cross inspectors were supposed to see. The hidden kind, the kind done behind clean doors. 3 days later, in a holding compound outside a bomb-shattered rail yard, Lotte heard the old lecture again in her memory. It had happened in Dresden in 1943, inside a school auditorium where the windows were blacked out and the girls sat in stiff rows under portraits of men they were supposed to worship. An officer from the party education office stood beside a projector. He had a pointer in his hand and the dead-eyed confidence of a man paid to sound certain. "This is how the Anglo-Americans disguise murder," he told them. Click. A grainy photograph appeared on the wall. A tiled room. Pipes. Drains. Showerheads. They call it sanitation. They call it delousing. They tell prisoners to undress. They separate women from men so there are fewer witnesses. Then they close the doors. No one in the room breathed. The officer lowered his voice. The showers release poison. Lotte remembered the way her friend Marta had gripped her sleeve. She remembered thinking the picture looked ordinary, and that was what made it terrifying. The officer said civilized language was the mask of barbarism. He said the Americans had no honor, only machinery. He said surrender was not survival. It was cooperation with your own murder. And Lotte had not believed all of it. Not all. But fear does not need full belief to live inside a person. It only needs enough detail. A tile wall, a closed door, a word like delousing. That was enough. The women were moved west through a Germany that no longer resembled the country they had been told was eternal. They passed houses with no fronts, churches split open like broken ribs, bridges dropped into rivers, families sleeping under carts. In one town, a woman stood in the street holding a framed photograph and screaming at no one. On the fourth night, the prisoners were loaded onto trucks and driven toward Antwerp, where an American transport ship waited under gray sky. "We are going across the ocean," Marta whispered. Frau Dietrich said, "Good. Then at least we will know where they bury us." No one answered. The Atlantic crossing took 11 days. The women were kept in a converted hold below deck. It was cold. It smelled of oil, metal, and too many bodies. But the bunks had blankets. The guards counted them twice a day and brought soup, bread, and sometimes coffee so weak it tasted like warm regret. Still, it was coffee. Real coffee. Marta stared into her tin cup the first time she received it. "Why feed us like this?" she asked. "Because they want us strong," Frau Dietrich said from the next bunk. "Labor camps need bodies that can stand." Lottie wanted to say the soup was better than anything she had eaten in Würzburg for months. She did not say it. Some truths felt like betrayal before they felt like truth. On the 9th night, a storm hit the transport. The hold rolled so violently that women cried out and grabbed the bunk frames. One American nurse came down with a bucket of clean cloths and nausea tablets, moving between prisoners with a tired face and practical hands. Frau Dietrich refused the tablet. Marta took one. Lottie watched the nurse kneel beside a girl who had vomited on her own shoes. The nurse did not curse her, did not strike her, did not laugh. She wiped the girl's mouth with a damp cloth and said in slow German, "Breathe. It will pass." That small mercy disturbed Lotte more than cruelty would have. Cruelty would have fit the picture. Mercy made the picture blur. They reached America on an April morning, docking at Norfolk under a sky so bright it seemed almost indecent. From a porthole, Lottie saw cranes moving on the pier, sailors laughing, trucks full of crates, buildings with unbroken windows. Beyond the harbor were streets that did not end in rubble, houses with roofs, trees beginning to bloom, a woman in a blue dress walking a child across the street as if the world had not been burning for 6 years. Marta pressed her forehead to the glass. "They live like nothing happened." "No," Lotte said softly. "They live like the war did not come here." Frau Dietrich turned away. "Because others paid for them. Maybe." But Lotte could not stop looking. The processing at the port was humiliating, but not sadistic. They were photographed, fingerprinted, examined by female medical staff, given gray cotton dresses stamped with PW in black, prisoner of war, 2 letters that felt heavy enough to bend her shoulders. Then they were put on a train heading south. For 2 days America moved past the windows in impossible quantities. Fields without shell holes, stores with full shelves, farmhouses painted white, children riding bicycles beside roads wide enough for 2 trucks to pass. The women watched in a silence that became accusation. On the second evening, Marta said, "How did a country like this need to be called weak?" Frau Dietrich snapped, "A full cupboard is not strength." "No," Marta said, but empty cupboards were not strength either. No one spoke for a long time after that. The train stopped before dawn at a pine-covered camp in Arkansas. The sign near the gate was written in English, but the meaning was clear enough. Prisoner Camp, United States Army. Wooden barracks stood in rows behind wire. Guard towers rose at the corners. Floodlights hung over the gate. It was still a prison, but it was not chaos. There were latrines, mess halls, infirmary tents, a laundry shed, and an administrative building with a bell over the door. The guards looked bored rather than hungry for violence. Boredom, Lottie thought, was its own kind of evidence. They were marched into the administration hall just after sunrise. Corporal Ruth Alden stood at the front with her clipboard. "New arrivals," she said through a German-speaking sergeant. "Personal effects will be logged. Medical inspection is complete. Before barracks assignment, all prisoners must pass through delousing and shower." The words hit the room like a weapon. Marta's hand found Lotte's wrist. A girl named Inge began backing away until she struck the wall. Frau Dietrich stepped forward, pale with fury. "No," Corporal Alden blinked. "No," the sergeant translated. Frau Dietrich pointed toward the tiled corridor behind the desk. Steam had already begun crawling from under the door. "We know what that room is," she said. "We know what you do when the door closes." The American corporal's expression tightened, not in anger, in confusion. "What does she mean?" The sergeant hesitated before translating. When he did, his voice changed. It became lower, embarrassed by the ugliness of the words. Frau Dietrich said it anyway. Gas. There it was. The word entered the room and made everything still. Corporal Alden looked from the sergeant to the women and back again. For 1 second she seemed too shocked to speak. Then she said, in English, very quietly, "God help us, they told them that too." The sergeant did not translate that line. Alden set down her clipboard. "Listen to me," she said, slower now. "This is a shower room. Water, soap, lice treatment. Nothing else." Frau Dietrich laughed once. It was a hard, broken sound. "That is what murderers say before they lock the door." Alden looked at the door, then at the women, then at the door again. Something in her face changed. Procedure failed her. Words were not enough. Regulations were not enough. A translation was not enough. She needed proof. Without another word, Alden walked to the metal door and pulled it wide open. Steam rolled out in a thick white wave. The women pressed backward as if the steam itself could kill them. Inside were tile walls, wooden benches, drains, metal pipes, showerheads, and 2 American female orderlies in undershirts rinsing buckets along the far wall. One looked up sharply. "Ruth, what are you doing?" "Leaving the door open," Alden said. She removed her cap and handed it to the sergeant. Then she stepped into the shower room fully clothed. The women stared. Alden stood beneath the nearest showerhead, reached up, and turned the knob. For 1 breathless second, nothing happened. Then water burst over her sleeve. Real water, hot enough to rise in white steam. It struck her shoulder, ran down her jacket, darkened the olive fabric, splashed over her boots, and hammered the tile at her feet. Alden held out her wet arm toward the corridor. "Water," she said. The sergeant translated, though no one needed him to. Alden turned her face into the stream. Water ran down her cheek. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Frau Dietrich. Not gas. Water. The room did not relax. Fear does not leave just because facts arrive. It bargains. It accuses. It searches for another trap. Lotta heard Frau Dietrich whisper, "A trick." But the word was weaker than before. Alden turned off the shower and walked back, dripping onto the floor. She did not smile. She did not ask them to be grateful. She only said, "The door stays open until the last woman is finished. 2 orderlies remain outside. No one will be locked in." Then she looked at the group. Someone must be first. No one moved. Lot felt every eye shift toward someone else. She thought of the auditorium in Dresden, the photograph on the wall, the officer's pointer tapping the showerheads. She thought of her brother Emil, who had written from the Western Front that capture was worse than death, and who had died 3 weeks later in a ditch near Aachen because he believed it. She thought of the American nurse on the ship wiping vomit from a German girl's mouth. She thought of water running over Alden's face. And then, before courage could become a debate, Lottie stepped forward. Marta grabbed her sleeve. "No. If it is a trick," Lottie whispered, "standing here will not save us." Marta's grip loosened. Lottie walked into the shower room. The tile was warm beneath her shoes. The air was thick with steam and the clean, sharp smell of carbolic soap. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Alden stood near the doorway, soaked, one hand holding the door open. "Clothes in the bin," she said softly. "Towel there. Soap on the wall." Lotta's fingers would not work at first. The buttons on her gray PW dress blurred. She hated the shame of undressing under fear. Hated the guards. Hated the lie. Hated herself for not knowing which hatred belonged where. At last, the dress came off. Then the underclothes. Then the worn stockings, stiff with old sweat and transport dust. She wrapped the towel around herself and moved under the nearest showerhead. Her hand rose to the knob. This was the place where the lie either became true or died. She turned it. Hot water hit her palm. Not a mist, not a smell. Not death wearing the name of hygiene. Water. So hot it stung. So ordinary it broke her. Lotte gasped and the sound became a sob before she could stop it. The water struck her wrist, her arm, her shoulder. It soaked her hair and ran down her face. It loosened the grime under her nails. It carried weeks of train smoke and ship oil into the drain. Behind her, Marta entered the room, then Inge, then another woman. One by one, terror turned into movement. They undressed, they flinched, they tested the water with 2 fingers. They stared at their own hands as if the skin there belonged to strangers. Marta stood under a showerhead and began to cry without making a sound. "It's only water," she said. Then louder, as if she needed the room to confirm it. "It's only water." Lottie reached for the soap, real soap, not a gray shaving from a ration block, not ash and fat and rumor. Soap that foamed white between her hands. She scrubbed her hair until her scalp hurt. She scrubbed the hollow at her throat. She scrubbed the smell of the hold, the cellar, the ruined rail yard, the war itself. But the thing being washed away first was not dirt, it was certainty. If they had lied about this, with photographs and lectures and officers, and the full weight of the state behind the lie, then what else had been built the same way? The Americans are animals. Democracy is weakness. Mercy is a mask. Law is only something fools obey until power arrives. The words dissolved one by one under hot water, not because America had become innocent in her mind. Lottie knew enough already to understand that no nation was innocent because it said so. But the lie had required one total picture. The enemy as monster, the self as righteous, the war as necessary, and now one ordinary shower had cracked the picture down the center. A monster does not leave the door open. When the women finished, clean cotton underclothes waited on a bench, fresh gray dresses, socks without holes, combs soaking in disinfectant, towels stacked by size. Lotta dressed slowly, as if every clean garment were another argument. Marta stood beside her, red-eyed and quiet. "They did not kill us," she said. "No, they made the door stay open." "Yes." Marta looked back toward the shower room. "What do we do with that?" Lot had no answer, because some truths do not comfort you when they arrive. Some truths take away the last shelter you had. That night, in barracks 1429 women lay awake on metal bunks with wool blankets over their knees. Outside, pine branches scraped against the wall. Somewhere near the gate, an American guard coughed. The camp lights hummed faintly through the windows. No one wanted to be the first to speak. At last, Ing said, "My father told me to shoot myself if I was captured." No one answered. He said the Americans would do worse than Russians, because Americans pretend to be clean. From the far bunk, Frau Dietrich said, "They are still the enemy." "Yes," Marta replied, "but not that enemy." The sentence settled over them. Not friends, not saviors, not pure, but not the thing they had been told. And that difference was large enough to destroy a life. Over the next days, the camp repeated the lesson without ceremony. Breakfast was oatmeal, bread, and bitter coffee. Not enough to make anyone forget prison, but enough to keep them standing. Work details lasted 8 hours, laundry, kitchen peeling, garden rows, mending uniforms. The guards counted them, corrected them, sometimes snapped at them, but they did not beat them. The infirmary treated blisters, fevers, lice bites, and the cough Marta had carried since the ship. On the 4th day, Lottie watched an American medic kneel to bandage Frau Dietrich's ankle after she twisted it stepping off a laundry cart. Frau Dietrich looked away the entire time, furious at needing help. The medic finished, tied the bandage, and said, "No walking detail tomorrow." Frau Dietrich muttered, "Why?" The medic shrugged. "Because you hurt your ankle. That was all. Not mercy as drama, mercy as rule. That was harder to dismiss." By the 2nd week, Lottie was assigned to the camp records hut because she could type and read some English. The hut contained filing cabinets, prisoner cards, medical ledgers, Red Cross forms, and a shelf of German-language books donated by churches. One afternoon, she found a thin pamphlet about the Geneva Convention. The English was difficult, but she worked through it line by line with a pencil. Prisoners of war must be humanely treated. Must, not should, not when convenient, not when they are lovable. Must. Corporal Alden found her reading it near the window. "Heavy reading," Alden said. Lottie looked up. Her English was still stiff but improving. "Your army follows this? It is supposed to." "Supposed to is not always follows." Alden gave a tired half-smile. "No, it isn't." That honesty surprised Lottie. Alden pulled a chair back and sat across from her. "We have men who hate you. Some lost brothers, some saw camps in Europe. Some would rather spit than hand you a blanket." Lotta lowered her eyes. Alden continued, "That is why rules matter. Feelings change by the hour. Rules have to hold when feelings don't. Lotta thought of Germany. There had been rules there too. So many rules. Rules about blood. Rules about speech. Rules about who could marry, teach, own, work, live. But those rules had not restrained cruelty. They had organized it. She said, we were taught that restraint was weakness. Alden's face hardened, but not at Lotta. And how did that lesson end? Lotta looked toward the window, where rows of pine trees shook in the wind beyond the wire. In ruins, she said. Alden nodded once. In ruins. That conversation stayed with Lotte longer than most. Not because it turned the Americans into saints. It did not. She saw prejudice in the camp. She saw black American soldiers made to eat apart from white soldiers in towns nearby. She heard guards use ugly words when they thought prisoners did not understand. She saw a country with its own rot under the paint. But she also saw something her old world had told her was impossible. A nation could be deeply flawed and still have people inside it fighting to make rules mean something. A guard could despise what you had served and still hold a door open. That was not perfection. It was discipline. In August, news of the war's end reached the women's barracks in pieces. First, Germany's surrender. Then the camps discovered in Europe. Then photographs in newspapers that made the room go silent in a way no propaganda lecture ever had. Lot stared at one grainy image until the lines on the page seemed to move. Marta whispered, "They told us others did this." No one corrected her, because the correction was too large for a sentence. They had not merely been lied to about America. They had been lied to about themselves, about what had been done in their name, about what had been hidden behind phrases like security and necessity and purification, about the kind of country they had been helping speak, type, route, file, stamp, and obey. Frau Dietrich tore one newspaper in half and called it Enemy Theater. But her hands were shaking. Lotta did not argue. There are moments when truth does not need defense. It only needs to be allowed to remain in the room. In November 1945, Lotta Brenner was put on a return list. Before she left, Corporal Alden handed her a small paper-wrapped parcel. "Not contraband," Alden said. "Just soap. You can take it or leave it." Lotte held the parcel in both hands. It was ordinary army soap. Hard, pale, sharp-smelling, worth almost nothing, she said. "Why?" Alden looked uncomfortable. "Because the first time mattered." Lottie could not answer. The transport home was quieter than the voyage out. When she reached Würzburg, there was no communications post left to return to. The wine cellar had collapsed. The street where her aunt lived was a black scar. Her mother and younger sister were living in a church basement with 3 other families and a stove that smoked whenever it rained. Her mother wept when she saw her. Then, after the crying stopped, she asked the question Lotte had been expecting. "What did they do to you?" Lotte sat on a crate beside the stove. "They put me in a camp," she said. "They made me work. They counted me every day." Her mother's face closed with dread. "And?" Lotte unwrapped the small bar of American soap. "And they gave me this." Her mother stared at it. Lotte told her about the corridor, the steam, the women pressing themselves against the wall, Frau Dietrich shouting gas, Corporal Alden stepping under the shower fully clothed so prisoners could see water run over her own face. Her mother listened without moving. When Lotte finished, the stove popped softly in the corner. Her mother whispered, "They told us capture meant death." "Yes, your brother believed that. I know." The 2 women sat with the soap between them like a piece of evidence on a courtroom table. At last her mother said, "Then what are we supposed to believe now?" Lotte had asked herself that question across an ocean, through a camp gate, underwater, over newspaper photographs, and inside every silence that followed. She did not have a complete answer, only a beginning. "We start by not trusting fear just because it comes with a flag," she said. Her mother covered her mouth and began to cry. Years later, Lotte would still keep that bar of soap wrapped in paper at the bottom of a wooden box. Beside it were her prisoner identification card, a photograph of Emil in uniform before he stopped smiling, and a letter from Marta, who eventually married a mechanic in Ohio, and wrote that she still could not smell army soap without remembering the sound of that shower turning on. Lotte never used the soap. That would have felt wrong. It was not there to clean anything. It was there to testify, because the room in Arkansas had been built to wash bodies. But for 29 frightened women, it became something else. A place where a government lie met an open door. A place where fear met hot water. A place where the enemy did not become perfect, but did become human. And once that happened, the old world could not be put back together. Not the same way. Not with the same words. Not behind the same closed doors. The door had opened. The lie had not survived the steam.